Hello, everyone. My name is Spencer Walsh. Welcome to today's show. You are listening to News Flash. Ladies and gentlemen, we got a good one for you. As always, we continue to keep you updated on the war in Gaza, nearing 25,000 confirmed deaths. Again, that's not counting the many people still in the rubble, and conflicts are increasing both in the region and in the south of the Gaza Strip, with more and more indication that people are moving, including the IDF is moving in on Al-Nasser Hospital, the last really fully functional hospital in the south of Gaza. Meanwhile, the U.S. has designated Yemen's Houthis as a specially designated global terrorist after the group's attacks on shipping in the Red Sea in response to Israel's attacks on Gaza. Meanwhile, the Senate kills a measure to scrutinize Israeli human rights as a condition for aid. It's from Bernie Sanders. Also, we have really spent a lot of time today about how to kind of spot red flags in politicians. This is something that I, at the time, and for a really long time, up until October 7th, just completely failed on, was on the subject of John Fetterman. So if you were, a John Fetterman head, I'm assuming many people are not now, given his just full right-wing turn at this point. Nathan Robinson of Current Affairs, can you give us a little lesson on how to recognize political imposters more frequently? Welcome to the show, everybody. It's your News Flash. All right, so we start at the top with Israel's war on Gaza, as aid for captives and the Palestinians have now entered Gaza. So here's a recap of some of the main developments of the day. So we start at the top here, and there are 25,000 plus killed and 61,504 wounded in the Gaza Strip. And I think it's important to say that a lot of the, especially with the really intense lack of any sort of medical care or any sort of power or any sort of connection or any sort of resources, period, in Gaza, even before October 7th, a shot in the leg most likely meant an amputation. So you can only imagine what is happening now for people, even with the smallest little injuries. In times we talked about in the last show, where Israelis are, and the IDF is intentionally stopping people from getting the care they need, Gazans from getting the care they need, and ending up killing them unnecessarily. I think it's going to be very, hopefully someday, when this is all over, there will be a real assessment of how many, not just deaths Israel caused, but how many excess deaths of people that otherwise could have survived, but were not able to get the basic medical care that they needed because of actions by the IDF. So I think, just something always to keep in mind. 387 plus Palestinians killed in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem. Israel, of course, has revised its estimated October 7th death toll down from 1,400 to 1,147, and 547 Israeli soldiers have been killed since October 7th, with at least 3,221 injured. So here are some of the broader key developments. Qatari-mediated aid in a deal has reached Gaza and the Gaza Strip. So it essentially allows aid supplies to be delivered to Palestinians and medicines to Israeli captives in the Gaza Strip. So I think, just medicine, period, I think honestly is something that Hamas would love to, get their hands on, even to give to the Israeli hostages, just to keep them alive as, bargaining chips. But I think that the idea that we've seen here clearly is that Palestinians getting medicine, basic medicine, represents a terror threat to the Israeli government. So that is why, this has to happen in this way. Hamas says it has turned down a request by France to inspect the medical packages due to our, quote, lack of confidence, they say, in the French government. Al Jazeera's Gaza bureau chief, we talked about him on the last show, Wael El-Dadoua. He was able to leave Gaza to get treatment for his arm injury that he suffered in an Israeli drone strike a couple weeks ago. So hopefully he is able to recover and hopefully able to, under much, much better circumstances, return. Someone who just lost so much of his family. Germany, probably one of the worst, countries on this in the world right now. And, they've done some other things too, just let's be real. Again, this is talking about this, their idea. They wanted to enter into the genocide convention, just be like, no, we really know what genocide looks like. This is not genocide. What Israel's doing, okay, trust us. It's just incredibly weird. They have committed to sending more tank shells to Israeli forces. I'm sure they'll be putting them to good use. So Germany's decision, they say, to Hamas says to send ammunition to Israel turns it into a direct partner in the war against our people in Gaza. The Council of the European Union adds Hamas chief Yahya Sinwar to the sanctions list, freezing his assets and funds in Europe if he had any. Far-right National Security Minister has criticized of the Israeli government, this is Ben Gvir. He criticized the Israeli government decision to pull out of the 36th Division from Gaza, saying it is a blunder that will lead to damage. Hamas's El-Din al-Qassam brigades released a video of targeting Israeli armored personnel carrier in the Sheikh Radwan neighborhood with an explosive and anti-tank Al-Yassin shell. An Israeli drone strike has killed 3 Palestinians near the Balata refugee camp east of Nablus. And this is just, happening. Really, the big story of the day has been just attacks all day long on the Nasser hospital. On Wednesday, Gaza Ministry of Health had said that Israeli forces committed 16 massacres in the Gaza Strip, killing 163 Palestinians and injuring 350 in the past 24 hours. Israel has killed at least 24,448 Palestinians and injured 61,504 others since October. And really warning as well as about in terms of the spread of hepatitis A, a liver disease, as a result of the overcrowding and low levels of hygiene in places of displacement in the Gaza Strip. We warn against stopping laboratory blood test materials at any moment, they say on their Telegram channel. On Tuesday evening, we saw the Israeli forces bombing the vicinity of the Nasser Medical Complex in Khan Yunis, forcing thousands of displaced Palestinians sheltering in the area to panic and run away. And they have continued to bomb. We were just getting some pictures in just before we started the show here, as Wednesday turns to Thursday in Europe, of some pretty bad stuff. Some just kids coming to the hospital after bombing in the area, and hundreds of Palestinians killed in the last 24 hours. Wafa news agency has reported that for the 6th day in a row, Israel had cut internet and mobile services in Gaza. Palestinian rescue teams and ambulances recovered the bodies of 25 martyrs and dozens of injured from under the rubble in the Al-Daraj neighborhood in Gaza City following an Israeli airstrike. That was again from Mondo Weiss. Also in Mondo Weiss, there was a drone strike in the West Bank, something that really has only been happening, this war from the air on the West Bank has only really been happening since October 7th. In the eastern part of Nablus City, 3 Palestinians were killed in the Balata refugee camp. So that was a very significant move there. So let's get into this, Ben Gvir situation. The far-right National Security Minister criticized the Israeli government decision to pull out the 36th Division from the Gaza Strip, saying it is a blunder that will lead to damage, essentially announcing that the intensive stage of the war had ended. That's, why that was the Army's justification to pull troops out. Since December, though, the U.S. has called for the Israeli government to move to the next phase of the war and to avoid targeting civilians. So let's be clear. There are troops in Gaza. There are still many troops in Gaza, Israeli troops, and of course they can bomb, as they had been doing for the first month, at any time and still kill people as they are right now. These, kind of limited withdrawals are a very, very good way for them to be able to turn to the international media and to have people back home, back in their kind of secondary audience, which is very much the West and the United States of America specifically, looking at them and being like, they're trying to move on. Biden gave them the message, and they calmed down a little bit. It's going to be okay. But really, there is just as much carnage. There's just as much suffering going on. It has not really slowed down at all. So it's important to keep in mind. Ben Gvir is a settler who lives in Hebron and has called for rebuilding settlements in the Gaza Strip and for ethnically cleansing Palestinians. He famously celebrated when Ariel Sharon suffered a stroke and fell into a coma by hosting a barbecue party in 2006. Sharon was the former Israeli prime minister who withdrew settlers and forces from Gaza in 2005, one of those being the Netanyahu government finance minister, which was Smotrich, Bezalel Smotrich. In the past 24 hours, also El Qassam Brigade has released a video targeting Israeli armored personnel characters in the Sheikh Rajwan neighborhood as they continue to notch up those Israeli casualties, and it should be about 547 soldiers, according to the Israeli military. So you're going to bet it's probably a little more than that. Back home in Washington, the Senate voted down a resolution that would have set the stage for Congress to place conditions on the U.S. military aid to Israel, quashing what has so far been the most serious effort on Capitol Hill to hold the U.S. ally to account for its brutal assault on Gaza, introduced by Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont. Obviously, in December, the resolution would have required the State Department to submit a report to Congress about allegations of human rights violations, essentially, by Israel, and whether or not the United States has helped in any way with committing those human rights violations. The amount of support it got was 11 senators, and of course, I love there was a senator named Brian Schatz from Hawaii who was like, well, if I was there, I would have supported it, but I couldn't make it, so I'm sorry about that. But I totally would have supported it had I been there. It's just like, thanks, really appreciate that. Again, not like we really would have had much of a chance passing anyway, but it certainly is good to see Bernie Sanders, just break past, some of his stubbornness and find his sense of soul about really all of the injustices that are clearly going on, and just break past some of his own personal bitterness and pettiness to actually do something, even if it is relatively small, in terms of getting the U.S. government to act. I mean, we are literally seeing videos of cemeteries being, with the gravestones still standing there, but cemeteries dug up with the bodies removed. This is what's coming out there on social media. So this is where we're at, and then we still have, 72. It's obviously incredibly depressing. It's incredibly demoralizing, but you have to consider that. No, you know what? There really is nothing to consider. It's a really just absolute crime, by these people. As again, dead Palestinians are just taken out of their mass graves. There's just relentless targeting of children, targeting of women, journalists. Every single word. It just feels almost cliche to say the amount and just go through the laundry list of war crimes that Israel has clearly committed on camera at this point. Again, we just have senators sitting around doing nothing, completely ignoring the situation, and then we have their Israeli spokespeople running wild all over the world and just threatening journalists from even trying to report on the situation. It's an incredibly, incredibly bleak situation. And it's just like, it's hard to feel like, okay, at least they would have gotten way less pickup, even a few weeks ago, a few years ago, which is probably true. But the fact that this is an idea, this conditions for aid cannot be let to die. Let's just sit on the floor. Bernie should definitely be bringing this up. Other people, in the squad, whatever, should be bringing this up on legislative level and just asking that, as really, because it is the main reason, our main vehicle of our support for the genocide is continuous military aid, and especially diplomatic cover, though, as well. But the military aid, does legitimately play a very, very big role. And again, all this stuff sounds just so cliche to say, but it's just another blatant, brutal repudiation of any, talk from the United States about we care about human rights, international law-based, rule-based order, whatever. Forget about it. Get it out of here. It is nonsense. More and more people have known it's nonsense for a while, but we are, continuing to see this. Meanwhile, we have this just Israeli spokespeople just running around the world threatening journalists while the government kills journalists back home. This was on Channel 4 with one of the most respected, British journalists there, Krishnan Gumurti, I believe is how you say his name. And this was with one of the, honestly one of the betters, and I say better as in, when I say better, I mean just evil spokespeople for the Israeli government in especially the UK, Elon Levy.
Krishnan, the civilian casualties...
That's an extraordinary number of civilian casualties.
And it's tragic. Krishnan, everyone who has been killed since October 7th would still be alive if Hamas had not declared war. If Hamas were not fighting this...
Again, that includes innocence, that includes, just women's... It's just saying, if Hamas hadn't started... It's literally admitting what they're doing is this collective punishment, war crime campaign right there.
War from densely populated areas, and no one else would be hurt.
Yes, but this
if
didn't
Hamas
start on October the 7th
and laid down
in their
its
terms,
arms.
did it?
You're right.
You can say this would not have happened had October the 7th not happened. They would say October the 7th wouldn't have happened had Israel not occupied Gaza in the first place.
I would be very wary of trying in any way to contextualize the atrocities of October 7th.
I'm explaining what they would say. I'm not contextualizing. I'm saying...
Again, it's like, what is this tone? Like, again, it's just Elon Levy there. It's just like absolutely just psychotic stuff. Like, what is this tone here? Like, or what? If you contextualize, this is like contextualization is like, and Murthy there is just like, I'm not trying to. It's like, why aren't you trying to contextualize it? It's like things should be contextualized. That's not a bad thing in, basic. Most humans with brains that are capable of thoughts and processing them together and have some sense and connection to logic and reality recognize that putting things in context is a good thing. And it is important to understand the broader situation. But again, they have a vested interest in stopping that. So anyway, let's go on to our next story. This is a really good one here in current affairs. Nathan J. Robinson writing, Pennsylvania Senator, yes, we're talking about him. Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman has recently disappointed and angered a lot of his progressive supporters while delighting conservatives, including Donald Trump Jr., saying, quote, I find myself every single week retweeting something Fetterman has said. Said a Fox and Friends co-host. As Israel has continued its genocidal war on Gaza, Fetterman has staunchly supported it, literally draping himself in the Israeli flag. He even went to his office to fetch an Israeli flag so that he could wave it at pro-Palestinian activists as they were being arrested. And again, this is someone who has just been a, vegetable draping himself in blue and white throughout the halls of Congress and, wherever he goes. If he does go back to Pennsylvania, his wife probably drives him there, just like, it's okay, buddy, or while he's just like, passed out in the back seat, just get power off, he's gone too far. But anyway, Fetterman said, just a whole host of just weird action. He's just someone who you can tell not only has made a really great, honestly, probably genuinely great career choice in terms of sucking up to the Israeli lobby, but has been doing it in a very awkward, very ineffective way. I mean, this is someone who has aesthetically made some very interesting choices politically, but in terms of charisma, in terms of presentation, this guy is, I'll use the term again, a vegetable. More, specifically like, cabbage, like smelly, rotty cabbage. This was just a few weeks ago after South Africa, or just last week, after South Africa brought a genocide case against Israel at the ICJ, rather than respond to South Africa's voluminous evidence and argumentation, and just in some way trying to defend Israel like other people have done, Fetterman said the country ought to sit this one out, which, whatever that means. Apparently, they're too much. They have too much racism in their country. To worry. I was like, I didn't even know. Like, it's like, you can go 3 different directions with that. None of them are good, and none of them make any sense coming from John Fett. I honestly just thought I think he was just sitting there and just like, South Africa, like, this is the internal monologue in his brain, just being like, why is South Africa saying this stuff about Israel? They should just sit this one out. I don't want to hear from them. And he just goes out there and says it to just mindless cheers from, an Orthodox Jewish group that he said that comment to. Israel is not the only issue on which Fetterman has classed with progressive Democrats. It's important to say, even as the climate crisis puts Earth in unprecedented peril, Fetterman is a staunch supporter of the fracking industry. He's also broken with immigration advocates to support for curbing migration, leading NBC News to label him a maverick. Ingrid Jacques of USA Today says we are seeing a whole new John Fetterman for the new year, now that he is kissing his progressive ways goodbye. Fetterman's stances has caused his support among young people to plummet quickly, horrified a number of his former campaign staffers, but he's made it clear he couldn't care less. And it's unlikely it'll affect him electorally. Fetterman remains popular in Pennsylvania and will probably pick up a Republican supporter for every young Democrat he alienates. Fetterman, for his part, claims he has not changed a lick, portraying his conservative stances as independence and a willingness to buck party orthodoxy. Where have we heard that from before? Just, again, go through the list. All the way back to Joe Lieberman, in terms of, he's setting himself up here to be this kind of orthodox Joe Manchin, Kristen Sinema, Joe Lieberman, way back when style guy who comes in there and is able to get all this attention, all this hype as this crazy guy. He even doesn't even wear a suit. That's how independent he is. Just kind of vouching or relying, I guess you could say, on the idiocy of the American voter to, just say, wave this little flag, wave this little signal to them as what has been traditionally understood to be, oh, this guy's independent, even though he is in no way independent and is continuously aligning himself with some of the most rapacious industries, especially in terms of influencing on our political system and lobbies and things like that. People most likely will eat it up because that is what, these things, this kind of clashing with the Democratic Party has been coded in the past by the media as, oh, this guy's really independent. He's a real true thinker. I think, let's just put it this way. Look, in any way, listening to John Fetterman talk for, 5 minutes, it's clear there's not much thinking going on there. Let's just put it that way. There's not much thinking going on, not too many neurons firing. Well, what accounts for the sense of betrayal among progressives? Well, one reason is that Fetterman outright lied about his positions. Before publicly coming out in support of fracking, he had publicly come out against it. He went from saying that he had never supported fracking to saying he had always supported it. And when he declared in December that he was not a progressive but a regular Democrat, supporters had hold out old statements in which Fetterman had explicitly pitched himself to voters as a progressive. Because we all remember in 2020 when he ran against Dr. Oz as a progressive. We all kind of knew he wasn't perfect on Israel and some other things, but he ran clearly as a progressive. Fetterman had even endorsed Bernie Sanders in 2016, and it was clear that he wanted to be carried forward by some of the energy that had drawn young supporters to Bernie, trying to pull kind of Ed Markey type of way. But he then used them cynically, lying about where he stood, doing so even more brazenly than Barack Obama. Young progressives who were drawn to Fetterman have a right to feel betrayed because they were. Even those who agree with Fetterman on his anti-immigration, pro-genocide stances should be able to see his dishonesty. Although, if you're fine with the obliteration of Gaza, I doubt you're terribly disturbed by politicians' fibs to voters. And yet, even though they were betrayed, I also think it was somewhat naive to have faith in Fetterman. Personally, I became suspicious of him quite early on. This is Robinson talking. Even as people I respected had high hopes for him, I just saw a few red flags that made me think, this guy is a classic self-serving politician who can't be relied on to advance progressive values. And really kind of, a big shout out. There were several, and we'll go through them, but also a real big shout out to my girlfriend, actually, who was wonderful, very politically engaged person. And I also am, though, happen to be 100 times more, in the political swamp of just being politically engaged than her. So I'm just telling her, oh, this guy, John Fetterman, seems pretty left wing, pretty cool. And then she hears oh, wait, he went to Harvard and he dresses like that. That is right away. And I think, my mom actually was someone who felt that a little bit, objectionable too. It is a very just blaring red sign that I should have been, in retrospect, 100% more aware of, that this person is dishonest, full of it, and is unserious. Because again, working class people don't go to their jobs looking like that. They go to their jobs in the uniform that's appropriate for their jobs. It's not something inherent to working class people as dressing like shit and looking like shit and all that stuff. So that was the first aesthetic that I freely and very, very openly admit that I fell for way too hard here. And of course, we could start though by going back to his time as Mayor Braddock, and it seemed clear that he deeply loved the city and was committed to revitalizing it. But his legacy there is actually quite controversial, with his successor saying that he is a fan club of a lot of people who actually aren't in Braddock. One can speculate about whether Fetterman used Braddock in the same way Pete Buttigieg, a fellow wealthy Harvard grad, used South Bend. A sandbox to build some good PR and Rust Belt cred in preparation for higher office. there were some odd things about him from the start, like his refusal to apologize for pulling a shotgun on a black jogger he's suspected of wrongly having a gun. Wrongly suspected of having a gun. But he also seemed like he might hold the key to getting Democrats back in touch with the working class. And I think it's this big, gruff aesthetic that was beyond anything else what pulled so many people, me included, in. And a lot of times, politics can be about aesthetic, but sometimes, in terms of tricking people to do a certain thing. But I was the one, along with so many other people, who fell for the aesthetic. I was the one who got tricked by the aesthetic while just sitting there at the same time thinking, oh, this could be really good, to learn people who maybe are a little more socially conservative. They see a guy who comes off like them, identifies like them. It may be very helpful. This kind of Rust Belt, two-time Obama, Trump 2016 voters, like that kind of a situation. And meanwhile, he was probably sitting in his campaign office. Actually, I don't know if he had the, forethought, throughout his stroke or whatever to do that, but he was probably, or his aides or whoever came up with the broader idea, was just laughing at all these progressives like myself and like leftists being like, there's just idiotic. I'm just putting on a costume. And Oz, by the way, is kind of the fact that he ran against somebody with the name Oz, I think is in the Wizard of Oz, is very, very kind of on the nose. And I think I do remember this was a very kind of controversial situation. So Robinson says here, I really started to become suspicious of Fetterman when his campaign adopted especially personality-focused series of messages against Dr. Oz. Now, granted, this may have been strategically sound. Fetterman is now in the Senate, and Oz is not. And even though Fetterman had a major stroke on the campaign trail, but I was disturbed by how little substance there was to the Fetterman campaign. His social media accounts were flooded with goofy memes and insults, not actual political positions. It struck me as very much the opposite of inspiring and wholesome Bernie Sanders' approach, which hammered on substantive issues like the cost of healthcare in college, led with promises to make material improvements in voters' lives. To progressives who ended up disappointed by Fetterman, then, I think there are some important lessons here. Don't trust the politicians, even if they seem cool. Be careful not to project onto them qualities they actually haven't shown to possess, which is a very, very good point. Which, again, as lefties were guilty of, liberals are guilty of that all the time. It just is a very common political situation because politicians are politicians at the end of the day, and they do political, politician-y type things. It is it's just a reality. Scrutinize politicians intentionally. Kristen Sinema, he writes here, began her political career as a Green Party activist and critic of capitalism, and she ended up one of the most pro-corporate Democrats in the Senate. Trust someone's record, not their promises. Bernie Sanders earned his supporters' trust in part through 40-plus years of consistency. Be ready to challenge political leaders if they waver from their promises. They don't deserve our loyalty. Politicians are public servants. We're not here to help them. They're here to serve us. And when they lie and betray us, they no longer deserve our support. John Fetterman is right that he was never as committed to progressive values as his supporters assumed, but he also chose to mislead his supporters. To avoid being burned, it's important to watch carefully for signs that an aspiring elected official is going to sell you out the moment they longer needed you. Sadly, most of them will do just that. So, very good piece there by Mr. Nathan Robinson in Current Affairs, a wonderful, wonderful magazine. But it is a really good and it's a really important point because aesthetics, again, are such a big part of politics right now. And I have no doubt that aesthetic would have appealed more to, that, as I said, that, white working class, two-time Obama, one-time Trump voter, Obama 2008, 2012, and Trump 2016, it probably, getting a kind of progressive message from somebody like John Fetterman, would have been a good thing. It would have been something that they may have been more receptive to than if it had been, someone else, for example, AOC or something like that. But or someone who spoke overly in the language of college, if that makes any sense. But meanwhile, as Nathan Robinson so adeptly says, look at the record. I mean, this man was in Harvard, very well educated, but still chooses to present himself as someone who just rolled out of bed. and somebody, by the way, who has a very scant record of doing anything major in terms of politics or any activism or anything like that before that, or any labor organizing that he claims to care so much about. So we were so swept up in this beautiful, perfect tough working class aesthetic. But again, this guy was just doing crazy stuff essentially throughout his entire career. And it was all open. It was there in the open for everyone to see. And we were the ones, the progressives, especially with this recent change, were the ones who clearly got fooled. Moral of the story, simple as that. Pay attention to the record, not to the rhetoric, not to the just the public presentation. And that is something that I could do certainly a lot better job of, especially with this situation. So hopefully we all kind of get a little bit of just better understanding of that and wisen up a little bit. But with that being said, that is all the time we have for the show today. We'll be back on Friday, actually. Yeah, Friday. It's Newsflash.